Hello, Morgan. All right. So we'll just wait for a few other people to show up. Get started. Well, Brian.
Hi, Bradley. How are you?
All right. How are you?
Good. Sorry, I'm a little late.
No problem. No problem.
So for the open house slides, were we supposed to do an accomplished ones and an ideas one?
No, you can do one or the other.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I started to do the ideas one, and then I thought as I was doing it, I already did some of this. I think it's only supposed to do one. So great.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Sorry for that, but yeah, it's
No,
really
don't
one.
apologize necessarily. I think you explained it in the meeting. It's just over time, these things just kind of float away. You need reminders.
Yeah. Well, good. I don't know. I know Amanda won't be able to make it. Maybe Jesse will be here in a bit. But I know Morgan is traveling in Africa. He's near Tanzania and the border with Kenya, I think.
Nice.
So he's probably trying to manage his bandwidth and enjoying the scenery and everything. So.
Of course. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I guess then I'll try to give an update.
Yeah, go ahead and give an update.
We're continuing to work on the Albany extension of the GSAP project. I guess we're calling it Sustainability Auditing Tool. And we've really started to get into the thick of it this week. So things are getting very, very interesting very quickly. Because the NetLogo web files, the way that NetLogo web works, Tortoise and Galapagos, it's like Galapagos seems to be this this whole massive code that's kind of an engine for running NetLogo, and then Tortoise is kind of how to compile it into HTML and JavaScript. So I've been digging into those because they're both open source. I think they're both at least written in part by Yuri Berlensky too, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do right now is some of the team members are kind of building the trivial parts of the website. It's not trivial, it's important, but they're not, I guess I shouldn't say trivial. Sorry, we scratch that from the record. They're building the non-model focused parts of the website. So the graphical user interface and connection to the GitHub accounts and things like that. And myself and another student are right now in the process of kind of pulling apart these giant NetLogo web files that are mostly JavaScript. In fact, it was so funny, it was so interesting looking that my partner actually was videotaping my computer screen as I was looking at them. And I'd love, if anyone knows anything about JavaScript, I'd love if somebody could explain to me what's happening, because I think I have sort of a handle on it, but it's pretty wild. So I'll show you what I mean, just because I can't really explain it. Let me just see if I can open a file really quick on my machine, and then I can show you what I mean. And the other bizarre part is that there seems to be a chunk of code in there that generates huge blocks of code. So it's almost like a self-perpetuating kind of chunk of JavaScript. I don't really know what it is, but here, let me just show it to you just because it's interesting.
All right.
So here's what the inside of a NetLogo model looks like when it's been exported from NetLogo Web.
Okay.
It's mostly, can you see my screen? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So it starts out as a basic HTML file, and then it has CSS, just mounds and mounds of it. It looks like they're using a few different libraries. So this is all CSS. So this is just saying where everything on the page will go. And then we hit this basic loading image. So far, so good. Then right here to the end of the file, and it's a huge file. It's just massive amounts of JavaScript. And this, where is it? This is what I was talking about. Look at that.
Yeah.
So, so I expected it to be complicated and long, but this is next level. And what's even weirder is that this JavaScript on the bottom of the file, this little line right here, the buffer module from Node.js, this line will generate that huge chunk of code if you put it in another HTML file.
Oh,
so
wow.
anyway, so I'm having a ball. This is so much fun. It's so interesting. And I'm just trying to kind of, unpack Walensky's work and still looking at places to add extensions for running Python more effectively.
Well, good.
Aha! Hello, Morgan.
Yeah.
Quite wild.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know anything about that, like what's going on there, but
and I've been working with JavaScript for a long time, and I've never seen anything quite like that. That wasn't a virus, I should say. So,
I know.
I've started to unpack it. It doesn't look viral. It looks like it's friendly because all of its variables and everything relate.
I think something happened here. We lost Brian. There he is.
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. I froze on my end.
Yeah, I saw that.
something happened. But so other than that, I've been really enjoying preparing for the open house and looking back on the year, thinking about the future. It's been really great. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Yeah. Thank you for the slides. This is the NetLogo web. It's NetLogo web and NetLogo. So this is basically the web version of NetLogo, and some functional on mobile devices. So this is going to be put up into that website, or it's going to be run it out of that website that you have.
So here I can show you. Yes. Just want to be really clear about it. So on NetLogo Web, we have these. It has the ability to export as HTML a NetLogo file once you've added it. So if I add, for example, this NetLogo model, I could export it as HTML, and that's what generates this crazy file I was looking at before. But what's nice about this crazy file is that it's kind of an independently running NetLogo instance. So it's so the whole idea is that we'll take these. We'll have a drop-down menu connected to the different models, like mine or Manchu or Hussein's, or just some of mine right now, because I haven't seen any of the other models yet. And these will just kind of run. And the idea will be that you'll be able to put two models next to each other. So you would have one running here, and then one running here, and then you could compare the output. And then something interesting that one of the students, actually, all this stuff is from the students. I was just going to make a website that just put the model up there so you could run it and connect it to your GitHub, and that was it.
Yeah.
But the students had some great ideas, and one of them was this comparing idea. This idea that, well, what if I want to run an active inference model on my organization on one side, and then on the other I want to run a more standard cooperation model, and then see how they differ over time, and how they run, and what they say, and kind of what the parameters are. So there's a comparison aspect to it. And then there's also the ability to save your model. So once you pick a model that you like, it could be maybe more than one, but for right now, I'm just thinking somebody's just going to want one. That they, for example, would want to show their colleagues. The idea is that the model would automatically save whatever random seed it's using. And then it would also save whatever values it's at the moment when it's saved. And then wrap those all up into a new NetLogo web HTML file and give that to the user, so that they could, keep working with their model on their own or show it to a colleague. So it's vaguely more interesting than the actual NetLogo web at the moment, but it's an interesting project.
Yeah, that's great. So you're moving along with the project for your course, and it's all kind of going well. No problems at all, or?
Well, it's going slowly because nobody else really has any web development experience. So things that I thought would be, just easy, we're just, okay, great, just whip it out, it's done, are turning out to be bigger headaches
Yeah.
than you would have thought. But we're supposed to be 30% done by Monday, so we'll get somewhere.
Okay. Well, that's
And
good.
yeah, we're moving along. It's just slow.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Yeah, and keep. Well, we'll keep doing this week, next week and the week after, just to keep tabs on it.
Right.
Okay.
We won't be
Jesse's.
able to do a voice update till about 10 more minutes. Jesse
Okay.
says.
Well, yeah. Okay. We'll come back to Jesse for updates. So you had your open house. I don't know if I want to launch into the open house directly right now, but you said you also had your open house slides to.
Yeah, which I could present. I could also. Oh, actually, I should present my GSOC slides really quickly. Actually,
All right. Yeah. Let's see.
If there's room for that, because
Oh,
the Google folks actually even emailed me and said, "Hey, you've got some pictures of your teammates on here, and you're describing their work. Are you sure they're okay with that?" Which I really appreciated. And I know I posted it on the Slack, and that I grabbed the images from the blog post on Medium. So I feel good about it. But what do we think about it as a lab? Should I? I could.
I lost you, Brian, or I lost your audio. I don't know what's going on.
Sorry, this keeps happening with me. All my computers. Maybe it's Firefox. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
But here, I'll try to share my slides again and just see if that works. Maybe it's when I don't just share the whole screen.
Just the tab. Yeah. There we go.
There's my whole screen. And I guess I was wondering if this seemed like an okay kind of summary of what we were up to.
Yeah, so it's saying cybernetic theory of personality, Big Five, application of ethical regulator theorem. Yeah, I mean, we didn't. He didn't really get into the. Well, he tried the ethical regulator theorem, but it went more in the direction of Big Five. But that's okay. We can, and then Manchu multi-agent reinforcement learning training models to make predictions. That's yeah. I don't know if actually one thing for Himanshu's work is that he looked at the structure of the communities. So he looked at maintainers versus how much activity does it become to create a maintainer, and how many maintainers do you have simulation. So if you run the simulation, you get a certain number of maintainers depending on the parameters you set up.
Interesting. I didn't know that about Himanshu's work.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I wish I knew more about it. Okay, great. Well, maybe I'll rework that slide a little bit to focus more on mine and just kind of gently suggest what they're.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess it's okay. I mean, you probably want to ask them, but I don't have a problem with like highlighting. What is this for? Like for Google?
It's internal to GSOC as well.
Oh,
so that's why I wanted to kind of try to represent the whole group rather than just me. I didn't, it just didn't seem right. They're like, well, my name's Brian, and here's what I did. So, I don't know. I was part of a team, and we had a good time all summer. So I wanted to try to show everything.
Yeah, I know. Well, you could ask them if they want to be.
Maybe I will.
Yeah. But that's I think that's a decent representation of what they did, and then you'll be doing your work on your stuff, of course, getting into that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's
talking about moving forward and all that. I also applied for funding through Albany to continue making models this year, so we'll see if that comes through in a few weeks.
Okay, would that be for spring or?
No, that's for this semester. They give out, I think it's like, they have like $10,000 to give away to undergrads doing research, and so I get a little bit.
So this was this undergrad research. You talked about getting a grant for summer before you got GSOC.
Right,
I think it's
right,
the same. Okay.
right. Which I tried to get, but it was anyway. Long story. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think this other one will work. Let's see. I guess my other slide is just.
Yeah, your screen stopped sharing actually.
Yeah. I
Right.
turned it off because I didn't want it to screw
Oh,
everything up again. Oh,
who's
hi.
Angela? Hello.
Hey, Angela.
Surprise!
I was just
I
going.
can't see or hear people for some reason, like not clearly.
Oh, yeah, we have a few issues with the audio, but that's okay.
Yeah. I'll see if I can fix mine. Doo. Yeah. Oh, looks right. Well, anyway, I was just showing some of my slides for a presentation I'm going to give at Google about our work this summer. So, no, yeah, then I guess I'm interested in what people think about this slide. I always try to keep the ethical regulator up front.
Yeah. Even though we didn't really get into that as much,
No,
like it was.
I tried for months. It's such a subtle and complex kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of reaching across quantitative and qualitative aspects of computation. It's really, really beautiful.
Yeah. This is good. I mean, just giving an overview of some of the GSOC stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I actually, and I'll talk about this later at the open house. I'm working on a GSOC presentation for that, but like across this group in DeviWorm, so I'm just getting all of those in. So I don't know if you want to contribute a slide to that or not. Well, let me know if when you're done with that. What you want to, how you want to do that. Angela said, "How I want to go into cognitive robotics. Restorative justice requires way more wisdom than I have. Robots are easier."
I mean, I'm still technically in, like, I have a restorative justice gig, but I have been warned away from the field, even though it's a really beautiful concept. It's you need wisdom.
Yeah.
Robots, much easier than humans.
Yeah.
So now are you doing restorative robot justice?
That should be a cool new subfield.
Hopefully not too soon, right?
Yeah, we don't need like Roombas killing each other here.
A Roomba with a knife.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I hope you've been doing well. You've been working on getting your. Jesse said, "Well, there's something for We Robot 2023." Have you been making progress on your graduate materials? And you said you were trying to get into a program.
Yeah, okay, so the one that I got into the third round, at the very end, I did the interview and they were like, darn, this is better done. It was a life logging project, yeah. They were like, oh, I have another gig that's life logging too. Yeah, I'm getting PhD. Okay. But anyway, like I didn't get into that program that you gave me a recommendation for, but I'm applying to masters because number one, it's like free in Germany and I want another master's that's relevant to my interest now that I can't use my social work degree here. Yeah, so I'll actually message you about that eventually.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like mind, brain, and behavior. So cognitive robotics, basically.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Gonna have to keep us posted on that progress.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, well, welcome back. I know you haven't been here in a while, so
It's good to be back.
Yeah. Jesse, are you ready to give an update, or I didn't know if you were ready yet? Otherwise, I can go into the open house stuff and All right, yeah, let's go in. So, Angela just joined us after several months, and but we're doing an open house for the lab, and this is an idea. It's just I want we've been trying to do it for a while, for a couple months, and finally had some time to start putting things together and putting out templates. So there's a open house channel in the Slack, and that has a lot of the materials in it. I think I also put it in the general channel. There are templates for people to give updates or people to provide. Like you can, there are two templates. One is to give an update on your personal journey, and then the second one is maybe an idea that you have for a project, or if you have a big project you're working on, to give an update on that. So anyone can participate. I'm not going to limit it to, just one or two people. I want as many people to participate as they can if they can. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen. And so this is the Slack. This is the open house channel here. So it looks like, Brian, we can talk about your slides in a little bit. I don't know if Morgan posted this template from the Royal Society. And then the general channel, I think, has the template. Here they are. So they're in the channel, in the general channel, there are these open house overviews, accomplishments, and small and large ideas. And so I'm thinking about 5 minutes, maybe 10 for these little talks that people do. You don't need to go into every detail, just kind of put together something coherent. There are like 4 or 5 slides in each template, and I went over them in a previous meeting where you have it's just basically asking you some things about the project. I can't remember how it's structured, but it's pretty easy to go through and put things together for. Yeah, so those are the templates, and so I've been doing the programming for this, and I have like a sheet here that I've created, and I've already been working on this, putting up. So these are all going to be hosted on YouTube, all these talks. So they're going to be there's going to be a big talk, which is this annual report, which I just posted. Actually, that's wrong. These are all recorded now. But there's a big talk, which is the annual report, and that's about 30 minutes long. Then there's this organizational tools talk that I was hoping maybe Jesse could do for about 10, a 10-minute long one. And that doesn't have to be in a template. That could be just maybe discussing the state of the art of our organizational tools, what those look like, how to maybe get started using them, that sort of thing. I'm then going to provide a DevaWorm review talk, and I have to do this for the Open Worm Foundation anyway, so I'm going to reuse that, and that'll be about 15 minutes. Then there's this phasic project that this past year I created a roadmap for, and this is one example of a project that's already been recorded. That's about 12 minutes long. Then this GSOC talk is actually something that was created for talk to Google, so that's already done, and that was up. I just made that go into that channel. I'm going to give a GSOC 2022 overview, and Brian, if you have slides for that, we could add them in. And then maybe Jesse could give a 5-minute talk on the internship program. And again, this doesn't need to be in a template. It could be if you want, and just kind of discussing the internship program, how do you apply maybe, or, what you can get out of it. Then I did a Slack and Discord overview that came out to 10 minutes. This is just a review of our Slack and Discord resources. So if you go, you come into the lab, you go to the lab website, you'll see that there's a tab where there's Slack and Discord resources. And those things are, I want to go through them and make sure people can orient themselves to them. Then we have the personal templates. So if you have, if you want to give an update in one of those templates, you're welcome to it. Brian said that he has his slides almost completed. I'll put completed. So that's good. And then Amanda also said that she would probably have some slides by next week. So, and then also Daniela said that she could do an update, but probably by the end of the year. And so we're not really on a strict timeline here. I think, if we can get this YouTube channel or this YouTube playlist up and running, that'll be good for an open house, and we can start to advertise it, and we can add content in. So I've been working on these, and one thing I found is I was planning out the length of time here for these videos, and I found that it takes a bit longer than I thought. So the annual report I had earmarked for 20 minutes originally, and it ended up being 30. The phasic project update, I wanted to get 5, but I really had to go to 12 for it. So these are, this is Slack and Discord is 10. I just thought of doing a Discord interview or a Discord overview for 5 minutes, but I decided it doesn't make much sense without the Slack overview, so I moved it to 10. So these times aren't set in stone. You could do maybe 10 minutes, but I would aim for 5, and then if you go over, then that's that's okay. But try to aim for like 5 minutes, and then if you go to 10, that's fine. So these are all going to be on YouTube. We have an open house playlist here. This is the lab YouTube channel, and you can see I've made this little cover or this thumbnail cover for the videos, and here they are. So they're all going to be in this playlist. So what happens is every time someone records one of these, I'll put it up in the playlist, and then we'll advertise the playlist on social media, other places, and we can consume it asynchronously. Whatever you want to consume, it's pretty self-explanatory. And I think it'll be helpful to get a lot of these topics out into the open. So a lot of these things are maybe it's procedures. There may be like things that we don't really get to do in the meetings. They're they're gonna be time sensitive, some of them, so they'll look dated in like 5 years, but that's okay. I just I want to get a state of the art, and I want to get people to see what we're doing and be a little bit more transparent about it. Yeah. So do we have any questions or comments about that? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's so, there's no hard and fast deadline. If we get if we get them from now to like mid-November, that's good. Like Danielle, can't make hers until the end of the year, but we'll just add in. One more thing I wanted to mention, and this is not like set in stone yet or anything, but I was thinking of having one kind of like semi-live thing where we have people in like a Jitsi room or something. And this is this future of cognitive science. So this is these papers that we were talking about last week, and the Trends in Cognitive Science journal has a bunch of papers that are sort of setting the pace of cognitive science as it stands right now. So we already have our what happened to cognitive science paper that we refer to often. So this event would be the future of cognitive science, and we'd have people come in. We might do it on a Saturday instead of a regular meeting, and discuss some of these papers. You do maybe a paper presentation. It doesn't need to have slides, but it at least should have like the papers available and people going through them and engaging with them. So this is something that I would like to do at some point. I don't know when that will be. I think maybe towards the end of the year when people have time maybe to sit down. It just basically, we can go over, maybe get a collection of the papers kind of at the beginning, just kind of state what the papers are. And then maybe we'll have some presentations and then we'll have some discussion. So it'll be like, I think it'll be very good because we don't usually get to have those discussions where we unpack papers in one area. In our meetings, we're usually moving around a lot. So that would be good. And then I don't know what the time would be for that. It could be an hour, it could be an hour and a half. It's really up to people doing the presentations, but I think probably an hour and a half would be best because it gives us time to talk about these things. So yeah. And Angela, okay, so Angela, she can see the screen at all. She probably should prep for the THSC launch today. Okay, ask Jesse about it later. So, all right, that's fine. Thank you for coming, Angela. Okay, so that's great. So, Brian, did you want to show your slides?
Sure. If people want to see them.
Yeah.
Feels kind of indulgent, but no, it's good. So let me show them. We'll bring them up. It's funny, my group is also on Discord with me right now, asking me questions about the project. So if you hear every once in a while, that's what's going on. All right, so let's see. Can you see that? Should I do it this way?
Which I can't see anything yet.
Aha, there we go. Right, yeah. They're not sharing anything. Oh my God. Oh, what a day. All right, so here we go. How about now?
Yep, see him.
I think maybe I'll just leave it like this instead of full screening it, just to avoid any issues. So this is the template, which is great. So I decided to use diagrams for everything. It was so much fun. I had a ball doing this. Accomplishments. I presented at my first scientific conference at NICWIC when Jesse was there too. We had a great time. So that happened, I think it was April. Wasn't it April?
Yeah.
I think so. And then from June to August, we completed the GSEC project with the International Neuroinformatics Coordinating Facility. So I just tried to put links for everything and a basic description of what was going on. And it's funny, these color changes were just kind of in there by default. I just didn't feel like changing them. I kind of like how these two projects kind of segue into this intuitionistic neurophenomenological project that these two are part of. So, so I tried to show that. That's pretty much my accomplishments. I mean, I did some other things, but these feel like the pertinent ones.
Yeah.
And then for the future, I hope to graduate from University at Albany, which I probably will, and then finish more blog posts and research into intuitionistic mathematics, neurophenomenology, and their relationship to computation. And I'm applying to the PhD program in RPI for cognitive science. I'll be taking the GRE this weekend for that, so that'll be fun.
All right.
And then later next year, I hope to do more conference presentations, participation in the academic community. For the next steps, I'll try to just basically say research and demo, engage with the academy and people doing deep thinking about these topics, and quiesce. Which we've talked about a lot, which has been really, really great for me. I've really gotten a lot out of that. And then for my giant ideas, computational models for the people, number one, or like the tip of the iceberg. Yeah. And then applications of theory that help us do that, kind of supporting that drive. And then underneath all of that, looking for orthogonality, or maybe we could call it foundational univalence. That might be an inappropriate or an abuse of terminology there, but it pleases me. And then I'll put my name right there.
Good. Yeah, that's great.
Slide walk through it.
Yeah. So I think that's great. That's exactly the right sort of pacing for it, I think. I wanted to give people just this chance to go through, and I don't want you to put everything down. Like, that's not the point. The point is to go through and say, this is the big idea. This is kind of what I did in maybe a couple of steps, some examples, and then, get into maybe some of the details and that's it. I have, yeah. So that would be good once you get this done. So then I guess you know how to record a video on your computer, yeah, and then
Yeah.
submit it to that box that I had. I think I have a link to the Google Drive somewhere in. I don't remember what channel it is. Could be the Slack.
Yeah,
It could be.
was it an open house, events discussion, general? But so how long should the video be, do you think?
Like I said, you can aim for 5 minutes, and if you go over, don't worry about it. It's like if you need more time, that's fine because it's not in a tight program. We're not like doing this in front of people like live.
Right.
We're just there's a video, and then maybe we'll do some like I don't know if it makes sense to do like a session where we just watch them together because it's like but it's I think it'll be fine to do that way, and we'll have a lot of content, but it's like then we'll slice it up. So we'll say here are these presentations from our members. Here might be some like other presentations that people have done on different topics, and we can do it that way. But we'll have them all there. So
yeah, I mean that sounds great. Yeah, I'm always the more the merrier, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be kind of an open house that exists almost in a decentralized way, which is so appropriate to the lab.
Yeah.
Kind of like the NeuroMatch conference that they did most recently. You can jump in and look at something and dive in if you want.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. I think like I mean like one of the things about NeuroMatch when they did this sort of thing where they had the videos, I don't know how many people saw them. Obviously, your talk is actually inspirational to people, from what I heard on you put it in Slack about how that's a resource now for people.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Dream come true.
Yeah.
My dog.
But I think the thing we can do though too is to actually like pick things and advertise them out on social media. So you say, here's what we're doing, and then these are some of our people talking about what they've done in the past year, and you can repackage that in different ways. So it's not just kind of like hidden from people, because sometimes if you put it in a playlist, it's there, but people won't go through it and do that. So it'll be nice and recyclable. You'll be able to go through it again and again and reuse them for things.
And maybe once we have the date of the open house, as we approach it, we could start to put out videos and links to, just links to different lab content, kind of like once or twice a week, just kind of say, hey, our open house is coming out, find out things like this, and, show like one of your videos, Bradley, on something really, really fascinating. I was rereading the presentation on hairballs, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
He was having a ball. I was like, this is so great. So yeah, I think the more we can share that kind of those kinds of wonderful content that we have in the lab, it's already here. We've already done the work. So
yeah,
getting it out there. And I'd be happy to help with that also. I don't know. I think Amanda's helping with it right now too. It's Amanda and Jesse, right? On social media.
Yeah, we haven't done a lot of stuff lately, but that's what we're doing.
Great.
So I mean, it's like just really a matter of figuring out how to advertise the content.
Right.
And then probably we'll have something on the medium too. Before once we get the playlist established, once we get some videos in it, and then we'll say, here's what so that'll be a good reference, and that'll be shorter than that'll be maybe 1,000 words or something, or a lot of screenshots, and we just say preview our open house materials. And
that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that. And I guess Jesse, are you ready to?
Hey, I think you can sort of talk at the time. Yeah, I'm glad to see all that come out for the open house and shake out that way. I think that looks it looks good. It looks like a thing. It looks like a real thing now,
Yeah.
and
real thing. Somebody really,
I'm happy to help flesh that out, and I can start making some of the components to it. I do think it's a good idea to the thing about the future of cognitive science or whatever. I think that's a pretty. I think that makes sense. I think going over the essays will be good. It's also not. I don't think it will be a really hard thing to look at a bunch of those essays. I think I'm kind of preparing. I'll put together something, maybe a Notion page or whatever, just basically just has them and people can read them, in one space because they're kind of spread out and they're trying to do, they're making them such that it's just sort of a. Basically, they basically made the essay stuff almost like what we're trying to do with an open house, just a bunch of essays. It's basically an essay open house for like ideas in the field. So, we can they're trying to make us look at them and go to their website and, look at other content. So that'll be cool. But yeah, Brian's slides looks really cool too. I think it'll be a nice format where pretty much anybody could do that too. I might mention it to some of the people in the intern program, but I think when that came up, like someone like if Sam was here and wanted to do that, I think she could put together that same template pretty well. I don't know if she's going to want to, but I might reach out to her specifically. Otherwise, I can just incorporate that into my bigger talk about like the energy program, which I think is a pretty reasonable thing to do. So, yeah, all of that looks really good.
All right. Yeah, that's great. Did you have any updates about like what you've been doing this week or?
Yeah, this week has been kind of a, well, I guess there's the Cognition Futures Reading Group, which is a concrete thing specifically that took place. We're kind of halfway through chapter 4. It's been good. I feel like, I think because, well, there's another, I'm finding the reading group to be valuable in the sense that I had an interesting sort of perspective external to everything else that's going on outside of the lab to some extent, where without being able to go into too many details, I essentially was asked to look over another I suppose manuscript or longer form text idea about some things, and kind of in the review / commentary zone about it. And it was someone who they were basically looking at aspects of some of the things that we covered in the lab, like things about, you could say things about empathy and robots fit. You could say things about AI in general. You could say things about like AI and culture. I kind of all fit in this space. And it's interesting because the way we talk about stuff here is a very particular way, and the way that we look at materials around stuff is a way. And just sort of it's interesting to kind of see the different backgrounds, and not just different backgrounds, not just how the writing is done, but the ideas and the ways in which someone is trying to communicate the ideas. Suffice to say, I don't think I had fully appreciated, which is something that someone in another space says a lot, and I like that phrasing here. I don't think I fully appreciated some of what we're looking at in terms of both cognition features in general, and the reading group with like Fuchs book right now and Kaplan and those things. because when you start, I don't know, at least when I started on this sort of journey, or tried to establish this whole, what, cognition futures set of people looking at stuff. Um, it, it's such a murky interdisciplinary space. Like it's really, really, really Wild West vibe to me anyway. Like there's so much stuff that sort of can be built out and hasn't been, or that just isn't rigorously done, or whatever. And so to go from all that, and then to be in a situation where I'm looking at something that's totally not from that, not from our sort of branch of discussion. It's really interesting to see the ideas, and how the ideas are being talked about, and how they're being gestured towards, or moved towards, or discussed. So I know this is sort of just words about it, and I'm not going to really get into a lot of details for a bunch of different reasons here, but that was really, I think I've kind of, there's sort of a understanding of maturity about my like, I'm not starting out on this anymore, and we've read Fuchs books, and we've read books about this stuff, and we've seen some stuff from Verla, and like, it's so tough because we've in one sense, we're 150 pages into Fuchs' book, and we read Verla's book, and it was like, well, that's not that much. And it's like, there's a sense of, well, you're only so far into this stuff, and you've only done a couple books in this whole like reading group thing. But if between that and a lot of CL stuff and the design discussions we have, like, there's actually a lot of really significant context there. And suffice to wrap this up a bit more, I would say, I'm kind of impressed and glad that what we're doing, at least for me, and I hope it's not too selfish, because I think other people are enjoying it, but the way we've been going through the reading group has actually paid off a lot more than I realized. I think that's the takeaway. Like, really getting deep in the weeds, and I really admire Fuchs' work. I don't actually know how I feel about his models, but I find the work, and to some extent Verla stuff too, in that last book, but I feel like I'm learning a lot about the situation of what, like, you have. I'm learning so much more in this area about, especially for cognitive science, I would say. And again, I don't think Fuchs is really is beyond reproach by any means, but it's more in this area. It's so, I think I'm seeing a really useful bridge between the We Robot experience that I had, I suppose. And I'm actually still writing about this to a little bit in like a blog or other update. But a really useful bridge between the We Robot experience, which is put into practice in a conference, in a discussion, a way of handling stuff in that context, and what Fuchs is trying to do, in the sense of Fuchs is being, very strongly advocating for a view, and then to various degrees of effect, trying to target another view and say, here is what is not, and here's what I think is. Here's how this works. Here's why this doesn't work. And I think I just have reached a stage in my development where I see, oh, like, that's to try to do that with a sense of, to do that well requires a very particular, you have, it's a very particular articulation and sense of what you want to do, and what's going on. And yeah, there's a, I know everybody here kind of gets what I'm saying. It's not like I'm on Team Fuchs, Fuchs for president, and like, all we got to use the Fuchs model. It's much more like realizing I had this exchange here. I'll have this exchange because I asked Bradley about something, and Bradley's like, "Well, let's understand that Fuchs is at this level of their career and their development, and they're tenured, and then they're doing who they are and how they're writing and why they're writing this way compared to other ways people write." And then when I first read the comment by Bradley, I'm like, "Well, yeah, of course." I know Fuchs. He's an old dude. He's been around the block. He's got a lot of things going on, so I know that. But what I guess what I'm really getting at with this is much more fully appreciating the trying. I think maybe a specific nugget of refined stuff from all that I'm saying here is that there's a certain approach, and why I mentioned We Robot is because I feel like We Robot is by far the best embodiment, but like physical embodiment of what I'm talking about. I've been around ever, with a semi exception to Envision. Like New York Celebration Women Community is a great conference, but it's not. There's a certain rigor of discussion that We Robot was just really good at. And I've been to like other conferences on AI or like the AI debates. And I would say even like the AI debates with Marcus, the first one or the second one, or some other like AI things, like there was a very particular, and it's kind of a shame because I can't say, oh well, look check out this recording, because they couldn't record a lot at the conference because whatever, and privacy stuff. But We Robot was really good at doing this thing where it was like, let us try to make the discussion around this topic as good as it can be, because we need to. We know this field is new. We know this field isn't that great. We know there's a lot of odds and ends. We know there's a lot of pressures going on. So let's try very hard to. It was like the reward was shifted away from like personal victory to let's try to hold this conversation to the highest standards possible. And I continue to think about that a lot, and I continue to think about how I run the reading group. I think Johan, as what I always talk about. Johan's really great at this. Like, I think Johan also embodies this better than pretty much anybody else I know across a lot of different fields. Like they're really good at like, let's get like the AA copy discussions would be great, or a lot of the other stuff that he gets into. Like he really tries to. I want to have as best discussion I can have about this. It's more about the discussion than what anybody particularly knows. Like, not to say he's focused on that, but just between that. And so I feel like I could do a lot better in terms of the reading group and setting these up and having materials and questions oriented that way, which is a work in progress for me. But just the experience of all of this has been a lot on my mind lately in terms of like how, if also in sort of an actual there's also a sort of efficiency to this process that I think is a bit of a fascinating thing. And I'm kind of rambling, and I'll wrap it up and this part of it by saying, what I mean by efficiency is that when you can really elevate a discussion, it's kind of a public good sort of a thing, I suppose. Let me turn this off because I did this right now. It's almost like when you get the discussion to such a way, and I'm not saying I don't think Fuchs is having immaculate discussion, but I really appreciate the effort that's being put into. When I first read some of the work, I'm like, he's really kind of reiterating himself a lot in ways that like, is this really necessary to say this again? But the more it's like, it's not really reiteration. It's more as like really careful framing of, I want to talk about why this fits differently here. and why, like, where am I trying to push this forward and why? And it's achieving that. The reality of achieving that effectively and pushing things forward is maybe different than the art of an actual writer or researcher or communicator trying to convey a point about how to do that. And that's the big magic of science or whatever, theory building or whatever we're trying to do. But the quality of the discussion itself, here we go, sorry. The art of having a really quality discussion has a particular efficiency to it's almost like an amplifier or just pre-digesting material in a way that that highlights the most important. Like if you can write or communicate in a way where you get to like what is the actual point of development here or not, I feel like that's higher level work, and I think I'm understanding a lot more about what that is. So anyway, I kind of talked about this enough, but that's been a big thing for me to kind of in the back of my mind lately, and I do want to write a bit more about that broadly, no less the We Robot blog post, no less some other things. So that's sort of one segment of stuff. And there's some lab admin stuff going on too. Someone actually reached out to me. I think their name, an undergrad from Albany reached out. They were a computer data science-ish person who's interested in AI, and they reached out. They saw our advertisement, and I will reply to them. I didn't get to fully engage them, but I think they sent it to me yesterday. So that's cool. There's also the form and some other work to do in preparation for spring. There's a lot going on with the internship program and that whole stuff in general. So like that's always fun, and I think about be nice to talk about that with you're saying, Ryan?
I forgot to say this in my update. I met with a bunch of freshmen the other day for dinner and told them about Orel and the internship program. So hopefully some of them will come your way.
Oh yeah.
See.
That's great.
One of them in particular was this. Well, anyway, sorry, Jesse, I could interrupt your thing, but I don't want to.
That's fine. You can if it's someone that you think might be reaching out, you can.
Yeah, I'll just tell you really quick. So this one kid that was there, I said that I did research, and if anybody wanted to talk to me about research, they should come over and say hi. And so this one kid came right over, and he was, I'm doing AI research. You want to see? And I was like, yeah, of course. I want to see what you're doing. And he showed me this thing on his phone where he had taken one of those games where it's like a two-dimensional scrolling game where you kind of jump around and try to avoid spikes and jump on platforms and stuff. But he had rigged it so that instead of one person, there were like 1,000. It was like Takeshi's Castle style. And so he had all the individual agents all running the course at the same time. And then he would gradually change so if somebody would win, he would kind of start weighting everything in terms of that agent, and somebody lost. I think the last person of every iteration got kicked out of the game. So you started out with thousands of people running it at the same time, or thousands of agents, and then they would move on to the next level, and then you would lose. So gradually, so he said he would run it for hours and see if he could train an agent to run the whole course. So it's really interesting. I was
Yeah.
Like, one of us. So hopefully they reach out. If not, I'll reach out to them.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, they were very young, so they weren't doing any neural net stuff or no. I think it was vaguely machine learning, vaguely symbolic,
Yeah.
kind of just the beginnings. It's really cool.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I hope hopefully that reaches out. I'll see. Maybe the person who reached out. I'm not sure. Let's see. But yeah, there's some other I know there's some things to do with some of the current other interns that I have to follow up on. There's been some talk about I should also say this. There's been talk about the Dev AI stuff, but I'm not sure what the latest is on that, and like where to push that if we're going to go anywhere with that in the immediate sense. But I do have another continuing with like sort of the VR stuff that I've kind of I'm looking into partly with one of my job stuff. There's also, I can pull this up quickly. There's also it's not really BCI, but it's sort of stuff like different devices and tools that can measure like some brainwave activity. And I don't have details for this, but things that might like can more accurately assess your sleep levels and some other things like that. Someone just sent me some other stuff about this, but I don't know if this is going to be.
Everyone is.
Yeah, that's time. So that there may be a little bit more ahead on this. This whole something's. This is very strange. Has anyone heard about it's a device called I think it's like the Muse versus the Mendy headbands. Morgan probably heard about them, but there's stuff that like for meditation or sleep, but like Muse and Mendy, like these are like these headbands that are just they go around your head or
yeah, okay, Mendy IO. I've seen some of these before. They have like sensors and they're measuring from prefrontal cortex, I guess, and they're just like bands around the head. So I don't know what they're measuring.
I have no real sense of them right now, but I may be looking at something like that. Suffice to say, I'm that's a complete tangent, but potentially there. But yeah, that's enough. I've had a long-winded ramble about these things. If there's any questions, I can touch up on some other things, but that's most of stuff. Yeah, and I'm looking. I think the open house is a good set of things to focus on, and I think I'm looking for lab too. Also, I think it might be nice. I think there's a certain. Oh, my last thought about the open house is that's great to have. I think that's a perfectly fine thing to do, and I think maybe if like a bonus, there's sort of a bonus stuff that, maybe using a similar template or a modified template that's project specific, because those are good templates for people, but like maybe having like a very very short presentation on like meta brains. Like the meta brains, or maybe I should say the representational brains and phenotypes, like research paper, like just because people are coming around, like they won't know what brain vehicles are in our developmental context that we did a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Or the meta brain stuff, and I could potentially make one also just for like the Society Ethics Technology team, like really really general overviews. And then it doesn't have to be on the agenda or anything, but just kind of like a somewhat updated, what is this thing? Like, here's your 5-minute introduction to representational brains and phenotypes. And you can mention a couple papers and say, here's a past goal we had, and here's kind of future work. Very, very short, but just to put it into one, I think that'd be quite useful for the lab and nice for the open house. But I'm saying that as like bonus round stuff, as in we don't have to worry about that. But if I'm going to be doing a lot of adjacent work, I might just bang them out on the side and have them available
Yeah,
as
yeah,
let's look at, because you can, do all of those updates at once. So we'll see.
yeah. I think we should have some, like, we shouldn't limit ourselves to the templates. Those are guides for what you want to, if you're clueless about what how to put these things together. But yeah, we should have some probably for the projects too. And I haven't gotten to that yet. I've just been programming, like, you know, very basic overviews. But I think it also makes sense to get into some of these projects a little bit more deeply, as we've done like presentations, say at MetaBrains, but it's like you have like it's limited by the format of say like a conference, so you have to like have a point. Whereas like if you're doing like a maybe like a tutorial on one of these things, you can go step through maybe how they're useful in general, and that might be good because I think it's like if I show you that talk that we did on at Bika on MetaBrains, that's a specific. You're applying it to a specific thing, and you're like, well, how does that work? Is it, so to kind of go through these things step by step. We when I did the open worm, or when I was involved in the open worm open house back in 2016, I think we did a couple of tutorials in addition to some of the project talks, and they were a little bit longer, but they had like, you know, um, they basically walked through step by step on how to apply something or how to do something. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So that's your update.
Yeah. That's broadly things.
All right. Well, yeah, that's great. And I think that conversation about conversations, I guess, or discourse on these topics, I think that comes with time. And I like the way our Cognition Futures Reading Group is going. I think it's, sometimes you have to lay out the context. And I think sometimes it's hard in a lot of
Yeah.
the things that we do in everyday life to get that context. I mean, if you read the book, on your own, you're taking notes, you're trying to think things through. But sometimes, it's it can be very tangential. People have different ideas about what to make of something. And especially in an interdisciplinary group, you're going to have people like say, oh, what about this? And I never thought about that before. Or, so I think that's useful. And it's always about improving that process too, because we have, we don't really know what we want to, I mean, it's open-ended. So we don't really know where it's going to go. We're going to try to get through the book, but sometimes we're going to have to take some detours. And I'm pleased with what I've seen there so far. I think it's been very productive, and it's a good model for, like maybe future endeavors like that. So I actually featured it in the lab update. So if you go to the lab update and the open house materials, I talk a little bit about that. So it's good.
Feature who?
They featured the Cognition Futures Reading Group in the open house materials. Yeah.
I just remember something I said for Brian in the chat about the paper they mentioned a while ago.
Yeah, I can share that with you.
Okay, because that was something that was random that I wanted to say that I think after the reading group, and I forgot because there was, yeah. But to follow up on that, as a slight anecdote, personal anecdote, it is a matter of time in a lot of ways, and I think I appreciate that more as someone who's older, and also someone who's jumped fields a couple times. And by that, I specifically mean when I did my first undergraduate tour of duty, as I call it sometimes, I was diving into like international relations and global political economy and this stuff that was like, like, wow, like there's a whole world, like there's a world of stuff that's happening. And I was like, how do you get abreast of that? Like, how do you reasonably deal with the fact that there's a bunch of narratives? There's like realism, there's liberalism, there's this constructivist philosophy. There's all these different approaches to how we understand international relations and uh, the different theories about what affords more peace and democratic peace theory, and like, is that actually applicable anymore? All the stuff that you get in is like, and when you start out, it's like, holy crap, like these discussions have been going on for a long time. You don't know it. Then like a year passes, then another year, and like, oh, like you have your bearings and things change, and then you have, you know, there's different reasons why I am or am not in that field directly anymore, but it just took time to get the context. And I feel like, yeah, like since I've been in this lab, which I joined in 2019, that's kind of been the foundation for me of like I'm sure there is a cognitive science lab at UAlbany, not to discredit that, but I wasn't involved in that directly. And the way people talked about AI, the way people talked about whatever, in what I was exposed to for a long time, there wasn't really a lot of focus on the kind of stuff like cognition futures is sort of the house and the space for talking about the whole big problem of it that I never was exposed to. And a lot of that's thanks to Bradley having a space for it here, and Bradley's own long-standing interest in this biology aspect, AI aspect, computation, and like brain vehicles and everything else. Like that's really cool. But there's definitely an element to time and being seasoned and doing the reading across. And it's funny because some of it is just reading a lot, but some of it isn't. Some of it definitively is not about the reading. Some of it definitively is about the discussion and being able to kind of see across that. So I feel like I really come to understand that knowing the desire to raise the quality of discussion is a great thing. Knowing how to do that, wow, what a throwback of my own self I just had, because I'm paraphrasing. I was saying, like, wanting to do something great, knowing how to do it is great, and then being able to do it is a whole different thing altogether. And then there's this fortune cookie that I got, like, when I was in college, probably in the same program that I'm saying I'm not a part of anymore. That was like, knowing what to do is like good, and knowing how to do it is like the next thing, and actually doing it is like, that's like real virtue, is like in the doing of the thing that you should do, and learning how to do it the right way to do it. It's like this, like, very like, wow, this is actually like a good fortune cookie. It's like really succinct and said a lot to it. It's like, that's awesome. And it's like that. It's like, you can't, but in the context of our discussion here, it's like, it takes a lot of work to do that. And it's tough because you don't have the bearings to do that when you come into this space, especially this space. And I keep, it's really interesting because I keep thinking of how I want to position myself in the space of the cognition future stuff, because like, do I want to say I'm a like disciple of Norbert Wiener, wanting to go, like, that was kind of my original approach. Like, okay, I want to go like to the cybernetics approach, and like, this is cool, what happened, this whole like thing. And it's like, well, I want to be somebody who is grounded in biology to an extent. So I don't want to do the whole the computational stuff, like the pure computational, like, let's just talk about creating these sort of artificial neural networks, like that was never the most appealing path for me. Like, that just felt like, that's important, I want to know that, but it felt, I was exposed to what I would say now was a little bit more of a few misguided sects of that, not in a sense of it being, mean or anything. But yeah, that's basically the meme that Brian had. It was pretty cool. Something about the doing, but I feel this is another sort of anecdote tangent discussion point, but I feel when I say I feel I don't really know what to call myself right now in terms of a researcher. And what I mean by that, like I can easily say I study cognitive science and AI. Boom, right? That's true. That's completely true. But I feel agnostic about some things, and I feel like I don't know the current word or phrasing or approach that suits me best in terms of what I want to do, because I feel like I'm totally on board with. I keep mentioning Levin during the discussion of Fuchs. Like I kept trying to bring back to Levin and some other stuff in our discussion, and I feel like that's really important to me, and it's related to. It's quite adjacent to how I view the lab and also Demon Worm in the sense of I don't want to untether myself from that. And I'm glad that Fuchs is kind of saying, hey, like, no, like I think there's basic affect. That's like your basal affectivity is this sort of basic lived, let's start there. That's the brainstem, that's not neocortex dependent. Like I feel like there's something there. And also sort of there's something with the understanding sort of the combinatorial aspect that we talk about a lot in Pete Platos, the combinatorial aspect of the underlying fundamental stuff, like that diagram we show where it's like the left side of the diagram was sort of just on the page. It was like, oh, well, here's sort of this sort of basic stuff that's underpinning the most proto self, the smallest sense of self possible. Like, and it's like, yeah, like I don't know how much more. I think Fuchs is going to be diving into like the social realm, which I think is great in the next chapter for chapter 5. But it's like I'm someone who I think it's the full stack matters. Like not just the brain, not just the brain and the body. Like I think it matters all the way down. Like I don't. At least for me, it does. But like it can't really say I made a joke before about being a full stack scientist in the lab, and maybe that'll be something like, oh, well, I'm a full stack cognitive science person. But I don't really know what that into the biology and everything else. I don't really know what to say about that yet. But I feel like I have much better formed senses of directions. I actually used this. I felt really cool because I mentioned this in. I used Fuchs's language of emotions as guidance or like homeostatic directives in like a normal person conversation yesterday, and I was very proud of myself because it was sort of like, yeah, emotions are sort of. I don't really know what the outcome that I want. I don't know the specific outcome that I want, but I feel like in a hot cold mechanism. My emotions are really clearly saying, I want to go about this and not the other way. And it was a nice discussion. But I feel like I know where I want to go in the cognitive science stuff, but there's such a almost exploit dilemma of I could read everybody's papers and I don't know, it's sort of this. Someone said the other day, not related to this at all, but related to my much beleaguered football teams firing their head coach and then an interim head coach taking over and saying, well, he's doing the best he can because he's basically flying this plane as he's building it to get off the ground. Like someone putting it together as they're, and I feel like that's kind of what the research is like. Like you, and as I read more, I do get better about this, and I'm trying really hard to focus on like the fundamentals of reading and writing right now. That's a big thing for me, and I'm not doing the greatest at it in some ways. But suffice to say, there's sort of this sense of like you have to kind of read what you want to read and put something out there, and then I think the putting it out there part is super important. Because that's the only way, especially in this field right now, because all of us there's no way we can cover them. Even the reading group, even with the entire lab, like 20 people, 50 people, even like I don't know what like the biggest like collective cognitive science group is that would that's like actual directed by a single agenda of exploring stuff. I don't know what it is, but like you could get a lot of people to cover different areas of the cognitive science, and it's just like the best you can do, I think, is just you have to put some output, because somebody maybe can say, hey, that's cool, but I know about this, and get the context that's missing, because you're not going to get it all yourself. And I think there's a very particular blend of realizing you're going to need that kind of feedback, and you're not going to get it yourself, and you have to like build your theory in mind with that feedback. And over time, you know, I think Fuchs has been around the block quite a bit in that sense, so he has done that and gotten it. He pulled together 3 other people's theories to mesh his own out and have a diagram that's like a sub point in his book. Like you could get that without even doing that. And it's like I'm kind of almost being able ready to do that, but to have it as like, oh well, here I'm going to use like Damasio and Hanskip and everybody else, and they're going to kind of make this point that, you know, and here's what I'm going to say, but this is like supporting argument to my point, which is about this stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's a lot of stuff. So anyway, I'm kind of I don't want to monologue too much more about this, but that's kind of just a stream of consciousness update about my views on that stuff. And I want to be more refined about a lot of it and push things forward. And there's a certain component to skill development also that's something to start out specifically in terms of what I'm going to be doing in the next couple months or year. But I'll say more about that later. So with that said, if there's any comments, we can discuss them. But otherwise, it's almost 12:30. So
Yeah.
Or 11:30. So we can move on to other stuff. Thanks for time.
Yeah, I think that was good. There were some themes in there about, especially towards the end, about the cog-sci groups and how they kind of manage all this information that's coming at them, and you know how they work together. So yeah, let's follow up on that. I'll think about it a little bit and give you some feedback on it.
Well, it's also interesting. Like I'd be curious, and this is a bit of a tangent, but like I know Brian's applying to PhD, and we have other people who've done that in the master program, and it's like you start. I've looked at PhD labs and applications and stuff for about 2 to 3 years now, more seriously, and not always the same level of seriousness or whatever. And you just get this other sense of context about stuff where it's like, oh, like I mentioned Judy Fan at UCSD, who I really like her way of talking about it. And like she's been to so much, she's been at Dizzy, she's been at like all these things I want to do. And it's a sense of like, if I got into her lab, she's not accepting students this year, I don't think, so I'm not going to. But like, if I got into her lab, it would be like, wow, like I really like your approach because she's using like hand-drawn and tools to do this other stuff. And like look at cognitive, like physically using tools as a cognitive toolkit lab. But it's sort of like there's such different kinds of approaches to trying to answer the question. And I feel like the mastery stuff, and I don't really hear people talk about this. It's so funny because I feel like I imagine there's like much better speakers about this than me, but I don't see people talking about the way I want to talk about it. So people find people just saying, oh, well, they talked about, it's kind of it's sort of frontier map adjacent. Like it's not really field dependent. It's sort of like how to have the discussion, but it's sort of like, I feel like the mastery of the stuff of being a good academic communicator or whatever, and I think like Feynman and Sagan and like other heroes in our fields kind of have done this implicitly, but to say it explicitly, it's sort of like what I said before. Like, how do you get to the interesting questions and do justice to the work that people have been trying to do around them? Joshua Tenenbaum's really good about this as well. Like I really like the way he talks in some of his, like he's very I think he does a nice job of situating like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's what a bunch of my colleagues are doing in this area because we're trying to solve this problem. And it's kind of this understanding of, you know, it's like fighting a war on many, many, many fronts in a sense, and have it like being real and reasonable, and the balance between being optimistic about an idea versus saying, well, you know, this is cool, but we don't know, and this is kind of a bad idea, and this was a good idea at a time, but then it went really bad. Like, you know, that takes time, but
Yeah.
also a special kind of discussion too.
Yeah, it does.
The end.
Yeah, thanks for bringing all those up. Did we ever? I can't remember if there was ever a Medium post on mastery. I think there was. That was a long time ago. It was like maybe a year or more ago. So maybe that's a. I haven't revisited that. Maybe we need to revisit that. But I think
Mastery, like in a discipline.
it was
or-
mastery, but it was like cybernetics flavored. There was a paper by I think it was. Could have been I don't remember who it was, but it was on mastery.
It does sound familiar,
Yeah, it
but
does
I
sound
don't
familiar,
don't
right?
remember like a post about it specifically.
I'll have to go back and check notes and things like that to see if we can find it. But that's something we could revisit. You know, it's definitely, you know, even if you want to maybe do it for the open house, maybe in the mentorship section, make a slide on mastery or something, you know, just to give people some, not just to explain the internship program, but like also to say, this is maybe one of the more subtle skills you'll learn, not just research, but some of these other things that are, you know, long-term lessons you're going to get out of this, you know. So I think that's good. Let's check the chat. We have a couple things Brian put in. Actually, Jesse put in Morgan, going way back to the headset discussion, that headband that was mentioned. Morgan said, yes, I've seen that. And so that's, yeah, I've seen those too. They sometimes have FNIR or EEG sensors in them, and they're measuring from the prefrontal cortex. So they're measuring like a state change. And, you know, sometimes you get like different, in EEG, you get different bands or waves of activity, and they correspond to like, you know, stressfulness or relaxation or things like that. But, you know, that's you know, that technology is something that isn't entirely perfected. So, but it's good though. You can do some interesting things with it. Jesse says, brain, you mentioned, or Brian. I make that mistake. Sometimes I say brain and then. You mentioned a Jan LeCun paper last time with respect to him adjusting and moving his views forwards. Like now that he's saying that there's this neurosymbolic aspect. And maybe Marcus not doing so much. Can you share a post that somewhere? And then Brian, I guess, put the open review paper down here. So this is the open review paper, The Path Towards Autonomous Machine Intelligence. And let me share my screen. So this is the paper, and this is Jan LeCun. How could machines learn as effectively as humans and animals? How could machines learn to reason and plan? How could machines learn representations of percepts and action plans at multiple levels of abstraction, enabling them to reason, predict, and plan at multiple time horizons? So now he's going to propose an architecture and training paradigms in which to construct autonomous intelligent agents. It combines concepts such as configurable predictive world models, behavior driven through intrinsic motivation, and hierarchical joint embedding architectures with self-supervised learning. So basically, sort of surveying some of these topics and getting. I think I saw a talk of his where he talks, and maybe we did it in an earlier meeting, where he kind of gets into this kind of like bringing together different models to do this. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting perspective. If you're interested in exploring that further, I would encourage it. And this JPEG in the chat. Oh, this is the meme that they were talking about.
I just made this out of what Jesse said.
Actually. Oh, okay.
It's just you were trying to explain, you were saying, well, you can think of what to do, but then better than that is knowing how, and then the best thing is actually doing it. So, okay, we can mean this.
We did
Yes.
mean this.
This is an original Orel meme now.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, this is basically that original one you can now make into an NFT and
Yeah. So yeah, you just type in, brain exploding meme maker, and it just pops right up. The Drake meme maker pops right up. Easy.
That's great. Yeah, we've had memes before in the meetings, so just so you know. All right. Yeah, that's great. So I want to go over a paper that I've been working on, and I'm kind of looking for feedback on. And this is something that we've discussed more in the Diva Worm group, but also in this group. So I've put two authors on it that we've discussed these issues. So it's been more of an informal discussion. I've written it up as a paper, and this is it's a special issue of Royal Society Interface Focus, and it's on symmetries and asymmetries. And so I think I mentioned this in a Diva Worm meeting a while back, a couple months ago, and then Adam Saffron emailed me and asked me if I could contribute. So I put together this paper. This is due at the end of the month. This needs to be submitted by the 31st. So this is a paper called Embodied Cognitive Morphogenesis as a Route to Intelligent Systems. And so yeah, it's about maybe 8,000 words. That's, I think, pretty close to the limit of what they want. And the idea is that we have these, we're talking about embryogenesis, and we could be talking about an actual organism or a cognitive agent. And there are these aspects of embryogenesis that serve to scaffold some of these intelligent information processing networks. And this kind of walks through some of the techniques we can use to look at some of this, some of how these asymmetries form, and how these I guess you could call them substrates form for intelligent information processing networks. So I put this in the Slack. Let's see if I can find the Slack here. I think I put this in the bioevolution paper here. So this is the actual special issue here, Symmetry of Life and Mind. And it's, actually this is the submission background here. This is in this special issue of Interface Focus, we'll explore the role of symmetry in complex adaptive systems across scales, ranging from the emergent dynamics of biophysical mechanisms to the shaping of underlying adaptations through ontogenetic and phylogenetic processes. So this is a pretty philosophical thing, but it's also, I think it fits into what we're doing. And I put this together, and I'm kind of hoping that I can get some feedback on it. It looks like we have a couple of thumbs up on it. So, and then it's going to be submitted by the end of the month, and then we'll have time to revise it. So I may be able to add an author or two after if someone wants to help with the revisions. But this is, I would suggest you take a look at it, and if you want to leave comments, please do. It's a lot of, it's an argument that kind of, sort of emerged from just thinking about how to phrase this problem. Because I think we've been talking about these issues a lot, but they've not really been stated in a way that's synthetic. Like Jesse was saying, there's room for synthesis, and you need to spend time doing that. You can't just throw all these ideas out there and then have them kind of come together automatically. You need to really spend some time synthesizing these things. And this kind of goes, really into some interesting directions. There's, we talk about morphogenesis, but also 4E cognition, and how 4E cognition might inform, what emerges from morphogenesis. So if you have, like an embryo, it's, starting to form, it's starting to differentiate into tissues, and you have these different aspects of its development that you can trace and then you can actually have these networks that emerge on the substrate, and then they have their own properties that come from the properties of the underlying morphogenesis. So that's a pretty difficult thing to maybe wrap your head around. But if you read the paper, maybe it becomes clearer as to where we're going with this. But yeah. So if you just want to take a look at that, that would be appreciated. Yeah. So I think it's
Yeah, that's really cool. I kind of knew a little bit, but I didn't see. I actually missed with everything that happened this week. I missed the tag in the Slack, so that's great. I'll definitely be going over that for sure. And yeah,
yes.
Yeah, where is it in the Slack? I'm trying to find it now.
It's in the bioevolution channel. Are you in that? I think you are because you thumbs up. You thumbs up it. So it's yeah. And then Jesse added a fire emoji. So you have three thumbs up and a fire. Yeah.
It's one of those things where whenever something gets added, I look at it, and this is the kind of thing. I think Morgan did this too. It looks like in the Slack. As soon as we see the title, we're like, "Oh my god, that looks great!" And then so I'll have to read it now.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah. So yeah, there's that, and that's by I guess the 31st is the deadline to submit that. And again, like I said, that's a first round, so they'll be suggesting edits and changes, and then that'll be after, and then hopefully it gets accepted into the special issue. And there are a lot of interesting papers in that special issue that are very philosophical. They run the gamut from Michael Levin is one of the co-editors on the special issue, Adam Safran as well. So their work. It's sort of a derivative of that. So yeah, this issue of symmetries and asymmetries, we talk about that on DevoWorm actually, and it's something that's been kind of divorced from what we're doing in this group. We haven't talked too much about some of the things that we've talked about in DevoWorm, but there is this theme of symmetries and asymmetries in embryogenesis and in organismal biology that I think is really underexplored. So when we think of symmetries and asymmetries, we think of physics, we think of symmetrical things in math. Biology symmetry is actually quite important as well. You have bilateral symmetrical organisms like ourselves. We have two sides. We have pairs of things like hands and eyes, and we have a midline, so that's where it divides. In some organisms, you have paired organs or paired cells, and then in some organisms, however, you have multiple fold symmetry. So you can have fourfold or eightfold symmetry, and it's the same principle. You have things that happen 8 times around, making a central axis, and so that's important for a number of things. I mean, you get they're the bilaterians that evolved very early in the tree of life, but that symmetry is it's underappreciated. I don't think that people think about it as being useful or important. What's more interesting though in development is you get these asymmetries, and so sometimes you get asymmetries in that are mutations. So they're in the heart, in the shape of the heart. Sometimes you get these asymmetries that are the product of a developmental disorder or a mutation. You get other things trying to think of when we have one organ on one side of our body, and there are notable asymmetries and things like that that develop. But also, we can have symmetry breaking, which is where you have cells that only have one division instead of two, and the other division dies off. The other cell dies off in that division, and that can have an effect on, like in C. elegans, in its development. You have a number of cell divisions like that, and it's actually significant because it leads to the formation of some structure or some special line of cells. And so this is something that is used to sort of facilitate changes in the morphology. So there are a lot of things like that that are important, and that's actually maybe something that is important in the formation of information processing in the organism, or maybe even in the brain as well, or what the brain sits on, which is the body. And then the body does things. It's situated in the environment where it's got like sensory inputs that are modified because of that asymmetry. So there are a lot of things going on like that that I don't think people have really talked about too much. Yeah. All right. So is there anything anyone else wanted to talk about before we move on? Or okay. Our Slack has been somewhat uneventful in the last week. I mean, we've had some posts, but it's not been too overwhelming, which is good. We've got, Cognition Futures is quite active. We've got things we've got a couple new people actually join in the lab or in the Slack, and they've been putting, they've announced themselves. Andrea Kay is a design researcher using ethnographic methods, and it looks like some people have maybe discussed some things here with her, and she's from Raza in Edinburgh. So that's and she's maybe interested in the LogicCL work. I think this is where I learned about Brian's newfound fame as a intuitionist mathematics expert. So, but yeah, this, and we have other things going on as well. Our Cognition Futures, I think that's been the most active page here. And there's a lot of good stuff going on that's generating from this reading group. So,
yeah, and I've been posting things from the cognitive modeling school that Morgan mentioned that's happening in India at Mandi IIT, I think it is. And there's been some really interesting things. One of them, we just passed it in the Cognitive Futures post. It's some slides from Marieka van Vugt on mindfulness in cognitive modeling. So I thought that was pertinent to our research. So if anybody wants to check that out, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, maybe before we keep going, maybe I'll do the Slack. I'll just give a quick update for Morgan's benefit, which is that I signed up for this cognitive modeling school. It's fascinating. I haven't been able to attend because it happens in the middle of the night when I'm asleep.
Yeah.
However, I do have a Google Drive where I've just been dumping all the resources that they've been giving, which includes recordings of lectures and presentations and example code. And things like that. So I did drop a link to my Google Drive in the Slack somewhere. Can't even really remember where now. But I don't really have too much to report on it, unfortunately, Morgan, because I just haven't. It's kind of one of those things where I signed up for it because it was like $10 American, and so I figured I would just have access to all these resources. One of the more interesting things, though, that I've been meaning to talk to Hussein about that came up in this school so far is the relationship of cognitive modeling to gamification and the gamification of things like walking up and down stairs, for example. So there were these. I can even share that if you want. There's a whole bunch of examples of gamification in kind of like public art interventions. So here, let me see if I can find that. I'll just share it really quick. It's very, very brief thing. Is this it? Is it you? There we go. Great. All right, so let me share this quickly. Screen. Click. Okay, there we go. So they have these things like the piano stairs, which is misspelled, but let's see if this. So they're trying to get people to take the stairs instead of the escalator. These guys get really excited about it.
Yeah.
You get the idea. There's a lot of, and there's a few other examples, including a nice TED Talk on gamification. But it's all kind of related to the fun theory. So yeah, where was let's see, this is another one. So they wanted to make the world's right, like get people to throw things away by making it fun to throw things away. So I think they tried to right. So they added a thing to make it sound like when you drop something in that it takes forever to get there. And there's just people reacting to it, and they're all discussing it. So yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And I'm sharing it with the lab as much as I can. So if anyone wants to dig deep or have a meeting where I kind of go through all the things that have come out of that winter school, I'd be happy to do that. It's all very fascinating. And a lot of other models that I've heard about before, like actor and some other cognitive models, they do deep tutorials on with lots of code and demonstrations. So yeah, I mean, Morgan, I really appreciate you suggesting it because it is super fascinating. I wish I had more time for it. That's my only complaint.
Oh yeah, that's great. That reminds me kind of like of how you might design a reinforcement learning algorithm. I don't know, people have done things of fun, but like that's like you motivate an agent with fun and or better yet, they have to make up what fun is. Like you don't really know what fun is until you've done it, right? Like
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'll do that next week then. Maybe I'll put something together this week because I think it's done now. So I have all the materials. So yeah, I could give a probably 20-minute presentation, just kind of going over what's available and where everything is. Oh, hey, look at that. Yes, I'm also doing this. I'm also signed up for this. So they're recording this. And so I also have these recordings. Yeah, Morgan, this thing, rethinking computational approaches to the mind, is so interesting sounding. Yeah, I know it was just, yeah, I got the emails about it, but I couldn't go again because of time zone. Let me see if I have the recordings and I'll share them on the Slack.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we'll have to take a look at that as well. So yeah, it's great, and like it's really so rethinking computation is about let's see, what are these approaches essentially about, or at least it's about like taking all these fields like we were talking about before, complexity science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, information theory, and data science, as well as computational theoretical neuroscience and philosophy to explore different computational approaches in the study of mind. So then there are these questions. So this is, another thing about like interdisciplinarity. I guess we were talking about this earlier. That you can just put together a list of different cognate fields, and like especially with like cognitive science, that varies from person to person or group to group. So like this is not something like if I asked you like what is a very broad perspective on artificial intelligence, you might give me some of these but not others. You might not talk about complexity science, or you might not talk about data science, or you might talk about development, or or evolution, and it really depends on the person who's approaching the problem. So I think that's an interesting lesson in that, and you get these groups that are this interdisciplinary. You have a lot of different ways you can go. Look, Conrad recordings are with causality in the brain. Okay. Yeah, and computation in the brain. Yeah, so these are all very good talks. Let's see, Jesse had a comment. If there are any interesting conferences on VR, AR, BCI-ish devices, those headbands, especially if there's a health or medical disability capacity, I'm on the lookout for those, or workshops around larger conferences, AAAI. Okay.
It wasn't related to that. It was kind of a general comment. But,
yeah.
That event specifically looks quite interesting.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna move on here. I'll share some papers as I usually do. It's that time again. Let's see. If I have this open, here it is. Okay, so let's let's see, where do we want to start? There's so many things we could do. This is an interesting picture. Speaking of memes that I found this week. So Meta has had its conference on, like their annual conference on progress in the metaverse and VR. And at that meeting, they had the famous, I think I put it in the Slack, where there's like this thing about like, we have legs now. Where is this? If it's in here or not. But, oh, was it probably in random actually? Yeah, legs are coming soon. Are you excited? And their avatars didn't have legs, now they do. But this is actually like motion capture. It's not really animated legs. So we'll see if this is something that we get in the future. But this is the type of, they had a lot of different things that they presented here. They have a new Pro headset that people are using for sort of, I guess it's for research, maybe for corporate use. And then they have this idea of using spreadsheets and office apps in your headset. So, you can do virtual collaboration. And I found this interesting because around the same time I was playing around with my headset, and I've been trying to do things like get into meetings, have meetings where I'm on the headset and I can like show virtual scenes in the headset, but to do it in Jitsi. And you can actually do this. It's a little bit of a convoluted way of doing it, but it can be done. And I was playing around with that like about 2 weeks ago. This is actually from about a week ago, where they show like how you might put office apps into a headset. So then the question is, why would you want to do that? And the answer is, well, I don't know. This is the thing about technology. You put things into different technologies and you see what gets adopted, what people really like, what they find useful. You could imagine, though, you could sort your applications, your different sheets and documents, push them back in space, pull them forward in space, move them to the side, and it's very spatial. And so, this is kind of like, people, I think at the time when the GUI was invented, people asked, why would you want a GUI? Because, you have the command line. So this is like, the same question. Why would you need an immersive environment to do your taxes? So, I mean, this is just interesting stuff. Right now, like if you go into Meta Quest or something like that, it's, there are like some ways to work on documents like this. They're very simple text editors, but they don't really have a good infrastructure for this type of thing. So it's, I found you can hook up a magic mouse to it though. So or a magic keyboard. So that's good. But yeah, this is just something for thought in terms of if, just thinking about the technology and how it's moving forward. Okay, so I have a bunch of papers here on Bernstein and movement science, and this is really from the stuff that I presented a couple weeks ago, especially to the Cognition Futures group. So in that presentation, I talked about synergetics and how it comes from Bernstein and how it comes out of movement science. So you have people like Turvey and Kelso who are seeking out like a dynamical systems approach to movement science, how we move around our environment. We use muscle synergies and that sort of thing. And that led me to a bunch of papers, putting them together in sort of a little library. So this is available for people to look at. I'll just go through some of these really quickly. This is a paper from Human Movement Science on the concept of activity in the last papers of Nikolai Bernstein. So Nikolai Bernstein was, of course, one of these early people who looked at movement science, and he thought about it in terms of like, not just physiology and measuring the physiology of movement, which is inherently dynamical, but also using an explanatory framework for that. And so his explanatory framework, it originated as sort of cybernetics, but towards the end of his life, he sort of saw that cybernetics is probably not going to be sufficient for this. So in this paper, we analyze Nikolai Bernstein's notion of the activity of living organisms, which he introduced at the end of his career. So this is like the activity of living organisms, I guess, is like movement or motility or things like that. It's interesting. A lot of Bernstein's work was translated from Russian, so not all of it's been translated, but also that it's not necessarily understandable to a English speaking audience. There's some, like when they do these translations of old work, sometimes it's a little bit hard to understand where they're going with things. But Bernstein did not leave a systematic description of his last thoughts, but many remarks in his writing, especially his last book, show that he thought deeply about the biological significance of the ideas he developed while studying motor control. He accepted that what something he calls negentropy, which is the tendency towards probabilistic determinacy, orderliness, free energy expenditure, which is kind of like free energy principle stuff, but it's very early in that. So that actually fits into the free energy principle. It plugs into that mind map as well. It is a hallmark of all life processes. Wrote extensively about the insufficiency of this property in search for a more complete definition of living organisms. This definition would include goal-directedness of development, anticipation, persistence, tendency towards autonomy, initiative, and more. Thus, this paper is an attempt to present the definition of activity of living organisms for English-speaking readers. So this is, this is actually kind of like also sort of in the Levin mind map, because Michael Levin's been talking about a lot of these ideas as well. Goal-directedness of development, particularly, and anticipation and persistence, tendency towards autonomy. There is an older concept, and it's not as old as, that's about the same era as this paper. It's called anticipatory biology, and it's the idea that biological systems develop these anticipatory drives, and this is Robert Rosen who did a lot of this work. And the idea is that there's this anticipatory drive in organisms that they try to seek out things like, so it could be single cells or whole organisms where they seek out things that look like goal-directed behavior, like satiating its thirst for chemicals or water or whatever, and going using behaviors to get there. So a lot of these ideas have been developed in the literature. And so it's really worth digging into the literature to find out about some of these older concepts and bring them into the modern world. This one is Nikolai Bernstein, Pioneer in Control in Cybernetics. This just talks about Bernstein as a cybernetics person, and how he thought about cybernetics. There's a priority of introducing the notion of feedback in the process of acting voluntary human movements. So if you walk or you move your arms to a target, that's active voluntary human movement. There's feedback. This was 12 years before Norbert Weiner's publication on cybernetics and feedback. So again, those ideas are being explored. Bernstein's in the Soviet Union, and they're kind of exploring similar things. Bernstein demonstrated how the problems of general physiology can be explored in terms of the structural analysis of movements. And so this is how this has been accorded a place in physiology, and when it developed, promised to be of the greatest value in cybernetics and in the exact mathematical formulation of a physiological theory of motor behavior. So, when he did this, when he was talking about feedback and human movement, he was thinking about some sort of exact mathematical formulation here. In his research, Bernstein modeled the function of the central nervous system and offered the cyberneticist a system for the development of analogs for experimental model making. So this is not analog, like, analog versus digital. This is like an analogy for experimental model making that was not only incomparably richer than examples of internal stabilizing processes, such as blood pressure, temperature, and sugar level regulating systems. So this is like we talk about homeostasis, and these are some good examples of homeostasis, especially blood pressure and temperature, where you have this set point and you have this external drive that, pushes the set point around. And then you recover to your original set point after you come back to equilibrium environmental conditions. So if you go out on a hot day and you go for a run, your body temperature rises. If you sit and cool off, it falls down, but it always returns to that set point. What he's saying is that there's, they were aiming for something richer than that. And then also more complex than the systems of dynamic regulation that have already been studied in some depth, such as the mechanisms of ocular accommodation. So there are a lot of things in terms of like neuroplasticity or physiological plasticity that involve dynamic regulation. And so they wanted to get a handle on that, but also have a more complex account of that. This is a paper on the HKB model. So in the mind map that I showed to the group, there's this model called the Haken-Kelso-Bunz model, which is a coordination dynamics model. And so this is talking about this model and revisiting it. And this is talking about the degree of symmetry controlling the dynamics. So symmetry, of course, being, behaving in equal measure on each side of the body, or having some sort of physical symmetry playing a role. So in finger coordination, both of your fingers have to be coordinated. They have to be, symmetrical, and the activity has to be symmetrical. And so they go through some of this model and some of the math behind it. So this HKB is a theory, but it's also a mathematical model. This is Debates in Dynamics, a Dynamical Systems Perspective on Action and Perception. This is Dagmar Sternod, who's, I think, a movement scientist. And she talks more about this seminal work of Kugler, Kelso, and Turvey, which is 1980. This formulated an agenda for understanding movement coordination based on the merging of Bernstein's insights in modern nonlinear dynamics. So now we're moving from cybernetics to nonlinear dynamics. And since the classic results on phase transitions and rhythmic bimanual coordination, which is this situation where you can take your fingers and you can move them in sync or against each other, and you can get these interesting sets of coordination dynamics. So if you put your right hand and your left hand together and you move your finger, and you move your fingers together or against each other, they can produce different patterns of dynamics. And this is a special issue. They talk about this workshop, Debates in Dynamics, and they kind of go into some of these ideas. And this paper is Bernstein's Levels of Movement Construction. This is about sort of more about Nikolai Bernstein's ideas. And so in this essay, we revisit each level of Bernstein's hierarchy, which is a hierarchy that he built of where the levels of hierarchy share a common language and perform complementing functions to bring about dexterous movements. So he thought of the underlying physiology behind movements as a hierarchy, and that hierarchies all share a common language. They all share a common set of signals so that they can, this is his model of control and coordination. So he actually goes to, they kind of, I think they talk about some of this hierarchical model that he uses. And then his hierarchy model, they revisit this, talking about the joint perspectives of the ecological approach to perception action, and then dynamical systems theory. So there's a lot of ecological dynamical stuff in Bernstein's work. This was like kind of contemporary or even before J.J. Gibson, so it's interesting that this was going on. And of course, Bernstein was in the Soviet Union, where they didn't have access to the literature here in North America and Europe. And then finally, this paper, Active Control of Rolling Maneuvers of a Robotic Finger with Hemispherical Tip. This talks about sensory motor coordination of a robotic finger. So, this is where they're using like a model of a physical model to understand this movement coordination. So this is a little bit different than the approaches talked about before. This is a physical model where they integrate some experiment with a robotic finger and its kinematics and its feedback with its surface. So you have this physical model of interaction with a surface, you have this movement coordination, and they're using a dynamical model and they're evaluating it. So this is just a taste of some of these things. There's also this area of haptic synergetics, which ties into the robot approach because haptics are, where you're studying touch. And of course, those also involve synergetics. This is the medium of haptic perception, a tensegrity hypothesis. So in the paper I just showed you before, the one we're working on, we did talk about tensegrity, which is basically this idea that you can use dynamic tension to build structures and make them stable. So this talks about haptic perception and how stability comes from these sorts of dynamic tensional forces. So the abstract reads, for any given animal, the sources of mechanical disturbances inducing tissue deformation define environment from the perspective of the animal's haptic perceptual system. So basically, if their tissue is deformed, they feel it. Their proprioceptive sensors, they feel the deformation, they respond in kind. Either they're touching something and they let up, or they press down, or they move. So they always have this signal telling them what to do. The system's achievements include perceiving the body, attachments to the body, and the surfaces and substances adjacent to the body. Among the perceptual systems themselves, it stands alone in having no defined medium. There's no articulated functional equivalent to air and water, the media that made possible the energy transmissions and diffusions underpinning other perceptual systems. To identifying the haptic system's medium, the authors focus on connective tissue in the conjunction of muscular, connective tissue net, and skeletal as the body's proper characterization. So they use a model of the body and they want to identify the haptic system's medium. So they use they sort of use a minimal model of the body to figure out what that looks like. The challenge is a biophysical formulation of MCS as a continuum that, similar to air and water, is homogeneous and isotropic. So that what they want to do is they want to find out what the body's medium is. And it's like air or water, which is like an environment that you would be in. And the idea is to look at like the outside environment, which could be air or water, but to also find a model for the body. And so when the body interacts with the environment, you have this medium like water or air, and it has a certain density. And then you have the body, which also has a certain specific density. And they try to, build a model of the body as this homogeneous thing. They kind of average out the different structures. Maybe that's not the best approach, but this is how they do it. And then they try to understand the difference between those. And so this is what they're doing here with this MFT model, a multifractal tensegrity model, with the shape and stability of the constituents of each scale from individual cell to whole body, derivative of continuous tension and discontinuous compression. Each component tensegrity of MFT is an adjustive receptive unit, and the array of tensions in the MFT is information about MCS. So each of these like sensors have a tension, and they're, this is how the body stays rigid, and when it's deformed, then they adjust and they send sensory information up, and that's how they model this whole process. So this is interesting because you can build a model like this, and it's very abstract, but you can use this sort of model to look at brain-body linkages, to limb perception phenomena attendant to amputation, vibration, anesthesia, neuropathy, and microgravity. So all the forces that would act on the body from different types of external environments, or changing the body through amputation, or vibrating it, or numbing the sense of awareness. All those things can have an effect here. So this is an interesting way to look at this. This kind of goes a little bit away from like the movement science aspect of this, but it's this haptic perception idea. And then finally, there's this paper, proprioception, a new look at an old concept, and we can talk about this in another week. But this actually, I think Amanda's interested in this area, so I think I'll save this paper for that week, but a week where she's here. But this kind of goes through proprioception. It's a nice review of what proprioception is in clinical contexts and in like a biological context. So you can link these two together. This this paper being the paper that kind of where they do a lot of this modeling of the body and of haptic perception and looking at it as tensegrity, as having a stable body, and then proprioception, what it is and how it behaves in real life. So that's a lot of those references. Yeah. So do we have any questions about that?
Yeah, the Bernstein work makes me think about that experiment that I can't seem to find, but is quoted all the time. This idea, this experiment, I think, where they're measuring brain activity and they basically prove that sometimes you're gonna, like, you send the signal to your arm that it's going to move before you're conscious that you're about to move the arm.
Yeah.
So I was trying to find this experiment while you were talking. So I was like, wow, maybe this is why in 2009 people are revisiting Bernstein's work, trying to find models for this kind of experience and how to talk about it cognitively. And I discovered some papers or some articles that were saying that experiment, of course, is debunked.
Yeah.
That it's not actually true. But I still, in fact, just the other day, I think I was listening to a Lex Friedman podcast, and the person he was interviewing referenced this experiment. So it's still being referenced, kind of like those Stanford jail authority experiments.
Yeah.
It's still being referenced as if it hasn't been debunked. But do you think that, that issue, that question of basically cognitive stasis is kind of what Bernstein's view of looking at the structures of behavior, or the structures of, cognitive stasis, right? So as opposed to like a homeostasis, like I love that part of the paper where it was saying that Bernstein was looking for a richer example of homeostasis, or dare we say an allostatic situation that's more rich than just blood sugar levels and things like that. And then if we get a rich model from Bernstein's experiments, maybe we can apply that to cognitive flows as well. But anyway, I that was fascinating. I had never heard of Bernstein, so I'm really excited to dig into his work even more.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. Well, there's a lot of it in Russian, I guess, and then there's stuff that's been translated in English. But it's interesting how people from 70 or 80 years ago, maybe 60 years ago, are visiting these concepts at a very broad level, and then they still persist today, and we kind of revisit them occasionally and have new insights. I think that the cognitive stasis idea is really fascinating. That's one of the things that, I don't think it's like people haven't thought about it. It's just kind of hard to know, how do you want to define different things that are going on in the brain? Because, we don't necessarily have a very good view of the dynamical brain. I mean, people are working on that, I guess, in terms of measurement, but, our measurements aren't particularly dynamical. We can do some work on it, but you can't put a box on someone's head and have them walk around or drive around. And I mean, you can do that to some. They've done this with EEG headsets where they have mobile EEG headsets, but other than that, yeah, it's hard to get a good cognitive state over time, how it evolves. So, but I think having that model of cognitive stasis is really interesting, especially for an agent. You could do this where you could actually, set it up so that you could define, different cognitive states and have the agent behave and kind of move from one state to another. But yeah, I think that the homeostasis link there is interesting. And then we also have to remember that in the brain, it's probably more like allostasis, where you're moving between states, and there's this allostatic drive, which is stress and other things that play a role. And in going back to that experiment that you mentioned, that was Benjamin Libet, and it was the free will experiment. And the idea here, and I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but it's where you would move your arm, but you could measure a readiness potential 200 milliseconds or something before you move the arm. So it's this was interpreted as being well, we don't really have free will because we have readiness potentials. But then the question is well, is that really, I mean, that's just a readiness potential. It could just be that, it's kind of like when you start your car, it turns over and then it starts, but then there's an intent to start the car before it even turns over. So you're committing to something, and then there's this preparatory thing. And then, so, I mean, it's really, I've never understood the experiment as like being a definitive approach to free will or whatever. And so, and I was reading about free will a couple weeks ago, and to me, it just doesn't seem like people have a really good handle on it in terms of like, especially how to put it into experiments and yeah, the neuroscience of free will. I mean, if someone wants to explore it and explain it to me, that would be good because I don't know. I'm lost, kind of lost on it. But
I mean, it's interesting to me also, even looking at this Wikipedia here, and I'll just go ahead and do it. Okay, now we're looking at my screen. They even use this as an example. So something like playing piano, which is something I do a lot, sometimes you do find yourself doing things almost unconsciously. So if anyone runs across a paper that kind of describes what is wrong with Libet's approach, like how the readiness potential does not actually correspond to intention, that maybe it's something else. I could think of a lot of different ways. Oh, wait, Morgan's saying something way more interesting.
Oh, okay.
So Morgan, you redid this experiment? That's so cool. What'd you find? Where is EG at? Oh, nice. Programmer. Well, maybe I'll redo the experiment. Maybe I'll make that part of our project with the Albany students, and we'll say, okay, today we're going to do an experiment. Oh, cool. What the heck? Morgan, we have to meet again. I don't know what these words are. No, we don't do, but I want to know more. Electrical geodesics.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Bradley.
That's okay.
Sorry, everyone. Tangent.
I mean, I guess my last point on that is, yeah, happy to chat. Yeah, you two should talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
I mean, I guess one point is that, a lot of like playing a piano or riding a bicycle is a certain type of like recall. And it's this idea of like procedural memory. So unlike something, so unlike something like learning how to recite like a poem or finding things in your closet, you're doing this stuff where you're just like, you learn how to do something. It's like riding a bike, and then you learn the sort of mechanics of it, and then you just do it afterwards. So there is no intention when you hop on a bike. You don't have to intentionally push the pedals and know that's cadence. It's just automatic. Now that's not to say that there's not free will involved in riding the bike. It's just that the procedure is not necessary. I mean, you have to learn it, but it's not something that you have to consider before you do it. And that's maybe different than what people think about in terms of free will. I don't know, but it's definitely, it's something that it's a different type of memory, different type of behavior than something like recalling specific information about something.
Right. It makes me think that those readiness potentials could also be just because of the iterations of the experiment that we would kind of climb in this area and constantly fire.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're done for today. I'm glad everyone enjoyed that. I'll post the papers in the Slack, that folder. And, it's just something when I was doing that presentation I came up with. People have tried to update the protocol for that experiment. Yeah, I mean, it's always like people want to optimize it. Because that's one of the tricks about designing an experiment is you have to a lot of times the question has to match the experiment. Sometimes it doesn't because people just say, well, this is easier to do. And then it turns out it doesn't really match the question you're asking. So it's always a challenge. Yeah. All right, everyone. Have a good week. And see you in Slack and in the other meetings, or in our Cognition Futures Reading Group and so forth. Thank you.